Okay, quick thought experiment. You wake up tomorrow and your entire neighborhood has no streets, no sidewalks, no roads, no alleys, nothing. To get to your house, you don't walk up to a front door. You climb a ladder onto the roof, walk across your neighbor's roof, your other neighbor's roof, and then drop down through a hole into your living room. That's not a thought experiment. That's Tuesday, in 7000 BCE, in a town called Çatalhöyük, in what's now central Turkey. Up to 8,000 people live there. No streets between the houses, homes built wall to wall, roof to roof, like a beehive made of mud brick. And here's the part that should really bother you. Archaeologists have been digging this place since the 1960s, and they still can't find a palace, can't find a temple, can't find a single house that's obviously the boss's house. A city that lasted over 1,000 years. No king, no obvious government building, and people apparently just figured it out. So either these people cracked something we still haven't, or we're about to find out this whole no rulers thing is more complicated than it sounds. Let's get into it. Now, your brain probably did the thing brains do with ancient people pictured something primitive. Huts, grunting, barely surviving. Çatalhöyük was none of that. This place ran for roughly 1,150 years, from about 7,100 BCE to 5,950 BCE. For context, that's longer than the gap between now and the fall of the Roman Empire. The houses had plastered walls smooth, white, repainted regularly. Some had murals, leopards, vultures, hunting scenes, geometric patterns that took real planning to pull off. People had furniture, built-in mud brick platforms for sleeping, sitting, working, hearths in specific corners, always oriented the same way, like there was an actual design code everyone followed. This wasn't a place people were surviving. It was a place people were living, and living with intention. So, scrap the caveman image. What you're actually looking at is one of the earliest known experiments in dense urban living, and the experiment ran for over a millennium without what we'd consider a government. Let's talk about the roof city thing first, because it's wild once you sit with it. There were no doors at ground level, none. The only way in or out of a house was a hole in the roof, reached by a wooden ladder. That means the streets of Çatalhöyük were up top. The rooftops were the public space where people walked, worked, cooked in good weather, and probably gossiped with the neighbors. Archaeologists think this design might have doubled as defense harder to raid a town when there's no street-level door to kick in, but it also just created a totally different kind of community. You couldn't avoid your neighbors. You walked over their roof to get anywhere. Now, here's the detail that really gets people. When someone died, they didn't bury them in a cemetery outside town. They buried them under the floor of their own house. Sometimes under the sleeping platform people slept on every night. Some bodies were buried, left for a while, then dug back up so the skull could be plastered, painted, and kept sometimes passed around, reburied elsewhere, even placed in a different house entirely. Archaeologists call some of these buildings history houses, homes that were rebuilt, replastered, and lived in generation after generation on the exact same spot, sometimes for over 100 years, layer after layer of family history literally built into the walls and floor. And through all of this, over 1,000 years of it, no house has been found that's significantly bigger, richer, or more decorated than the others. No palace, no throne room, no obvious ruling family burial with a mountain of grave goods, grain storage, tools, obsidian blades, beads. It's all spread fairly evenly across households. Whatever social organization Çatalhöyük had, it does not look like it ran on kings. Now, before you go telling everyone Çatalhöyük was some perfect ancient utopia, slow down, because archaeologists actually argue about this constantly. Back in the 1960s, the original excavator, James Mellart, looked at all the female figurines found at the site, some famously depicting a large, seated woman flanked by leopards, and ran with the idea that Çatalhöyük was a goddess-worshipping matriarchy. It's a great story. It just isn't what the more recent, far more rigorous excavations back up. Ian Hodder, who led a much longer and more careful dig at the site starting in the 1990s, has been pretty blunt about it. The evidence doesn't clearly support matriarchy, patriarchy, or really any strong gender hierarchy at all. Studies of skeletons show men and women eating similar diets, doing similar physical work, and getting similar burial treatment. So the honest answer is messier than ancient goddess society. It looks more like no strong evidence of gender hierarchy, and no strong evidence of political hierarchy either, which is its own kind of remarkable, even without the mythology. And here's the other pushback worth naming. Absence of a palace isn't automatically proof of equality. Maybe status was expressed in ways archaeology just can't see easily: reputation, ritual knowledge, family lineage. Who got remembered in which history house? We're reading 4,000-year-old ash and bone. There's a limit to what certainty we're entitled to here. So the fair version of this story isn't they had no hierarchy, full stop. It's for over 1,000 years, at real urban scale, this community left behind remarkably little evidence of the kind of hierarchy we assume complex societies need, and that's still genuinely debated, not settled fact. Here's what actually sits with me about Çatalhöyük. We tend to assume that once you get enough people living close together, you need a boss. Someone to organize the grain, settle the disputes, run the show. Hierarchy gets treated like a law of physics density and kings out. Çatalhöyük doesn't prove that assumption wrong, but it does poke a serious hole in it. 8,000 people, over 1,000 years, walking across each other's roofs every single day, burying their dead under their own kitchen floor, and doing it without leaving behind a single obvious throne. Maybe what held that place together wasn't a ruler. Maybe it was the sheer unavoidable intimacy of the design itself. You cannot ignore your neighbor when you have to cross his roof to get home. We like to think civilization is a ladder, and hierarchy is just what's waiting for you at the top rung. Çatalhöyük is a reminder that some of the earliest people to try dense, complicated, long-term urban living tried it another way first, and it worked, for longer than most empires have ever managed. Whether that was a choice or just what happens before hierarchy invents itself, that's still an open question. And honestly, that's the more honest ending than the one where I tell you they had it all figured out. That's Çatalhöyük, the city that walked on its own roof, buried its dead in the living room, and still hasn't handed archaeologists a single crown.